And Dolphin 3 duty. Okay, if it's possible, can you give us a bit of a rundown? We listened to most. I'm just a bit concerned about Blue, the one who's got a bit of power loss.
Roger. As far as I can ascertain and listening out, he seems to have his mate and Blue section will give you a run on that shortly. What happened is we ran over. There was a hell of a lot of shit that came up. After we had passed over, we saw the dam but couldn't identify the target. No flares came up. Orange section managed to drop because of the ground fire, and they used that as a marker. We elected to do a racetrack and put our bombers through. It was not greatest.
Yeah, Roger, I understand. Now, red and blue section, they actually dropped.
Roger, they unfortunately went over to drop with us. Some of them lost us in the turn. One dropped to the south. I saw a stick there. That may have been a cam, but I saw a couple off to the south. Otherwise, the hunter dropped, I didn't see.
Okay, that's good, right. No hassle. Blue, how did you get on your drop?
So we don't know. We just took a stab. We took a guess at the fire that was started by the first one.
Okay, thanks very much. And keep us posted on Blue. And I understand for one of your sections you wear green sections.
Yeah, that's red 3.
Okay, Roger. And I understand he's going to wear green sections, Eddie.
That is affirmative.
Roger, fine. And that is due shortage, I figure.
That's right. That's all from
Shortage on liquor, Oscar.
Go ahead, Green.
Roger, the...
Is that tape still going, or have you turned it over, or what? No, it's still going. Amazing.
So they reckon that's the director.
Okay, that sounds quite fine. Chris, I was just a bit worried about that other guy.
Yeah, at this stage I'm not very happy with him.
Okay, not to worry. One of the factors is that the bloody place is certainly occupied. I understand there was a lot of ground fire.
Yeah, too much.
You know, what are your considerations about the morning, man?
I'll have a bear, then I'll think twice.
Okay, I reckon if you do it high, we should be...
Yeah, Roger.
Okay, well, I'm with Greg Todd today. Once a brown job, jumped ship and became a blue job. But Greg flew on 6 different operational squadrons and really was in the air for the entire duration of the war, from 1970 right through to the end. So I know you've got a long and very interesting story to tell, Greg, but I appreciate the opportunity to get this down on the record. So maybe just fast forward to how you ended up in the Air Force. I know you did your national service in the Army, and then you worked at Air Rhodesia for a while, and then went on pilot selection in 1970, I think it was.
That's correct, yeah. Just one correction, it was 5 operational, and the first squadron I was on was obviously the training squadron, which was 18 months of first province and then vampires.
Okay.
And thereafter, the other 5 were operational.
Okay. Just talk us through your cadet course, Greg, a little bit about...
Well, first 4.5 months was initial training school. That was all the square bashing and running around at the double all the time, and apparently I was always late and caused the squad to get extra bloody running and things like that. And it's just normal BS, you know. And I've done it in the Browns for my national service, and but this was a bit more intense, that's for sure. So and during that time. We did classroom work, and we got hounded at night by our senior course, who kept us awake all night, cleaning squash courts and things like that. But it was all character building stuff, getting us ready for the actual flying, a phase which started, which was BFS, Basic Flying School. That was in Provost T-52s, which was a radial engine trainer with a tail wheel, so it's a bit more challenging to fly than a nose wheel aircraft. And we did 120 hours on basic flying school, and then I think we were off for Christmas and we came back, and we are now on to Vampire T11s, which is advanced flying school. Again, 120 hours on that, all formation flying, instrument flying, things like that. It's all very good training in cross countries, and we finished off with the final cross country to the Lorenco Marks, as it was then. Which was fine, jolly, and then we came back solo from it. We did the down leg with the instructors and came back solo. One of the interesting things on that was we We're flying low level from about 100 miles north of Maputo. I was at number 2, and we were low level over the sea. And well, probably about, I could see the wake, because the vampire sits nose up or tail down, as it were, and the efflux from the jet pipe was making a wave in the water. And he crossed over some guys fishermen in a dugout, and I got a bird's eye view of these guys bailing over the side in sheer terror. And it was just one of those things. Anyway, landed at Maputo, drank far too much, came home, and shortly after that was the wings parade. 13 of us pilots were chosen, 8 of us got our wings on that day. All 8 of us are still alive, 5 of us living in the Cape, believe it or not, and 1 in Australia, 2 in Joburg. Other courses either lost people from accidents or war incidents, shot down and killed, things like that. So we are lucky that all 8 are still around.
Just name some of the chaps that passed out
with me. There's 2 Baldwins. Steve Baldwin got the Sword of Honour, Malcolm Baldwin, or Baldy as we call him, Steve Murray, Tony Oakley, Mike Litzen, Vic Culpin, I think Pete Simmons, did I mention? I can't remember.
Pete Simmons, yeah. Okay. Same course. And then your first operational deployment, it was with Provost, I think.
Yeah, it was. One of the first ones was very interesting because we took it was after the Altena farm, the 4th Squadron moved up and we were operating out of Centenary, mostly with Probs, but we had a couple of Trojans there for Recce and Kazabak. But this one particular instance was with SAS, and I took this guy with me, but there was a bit of chatter and lots of radio work, and the tech who was strapping in the observer, who was a VR, he put the switch onto mute. There's a switch on it for when you're instructing, you can mute everything and speak to the student. But he never put it off again. So while I was taking off and close to the source of the radio at the airfield, it was fine. And then when I got over to the contact area, I couldn't hear a damn thing. And I could hear very faintly. Anyway, the bottom line is we put in 2 attacks or something like that. I shot through the ankle, and it was a very poor effort because of a switch. Things like that happen.
So Greg, straight after you got your wings, you went onto vampires.
Well, we were still on vampires, but we did something that was called an OCU, Operational Conversion Unit, and that's where you learn to fly an aircraft with weapons.
Right.
And we learned front gun with 20mm, 3-inch rockets with 60-pound concrete blocks on the end of them as practice rockets. We did high dive with practice bombs, and lots of formation, battle formation, and it was quite intensive, and we came up with some pretty good scores, and at the end of that you were now considered, you had got your wings and your rank at the end of wings, but at the end of the OCU, the course was split up and they went to different squadrons. Some of them went to 4th Squadron, 1 Squadron Hunters, one guy went off straight back to 6th Squadron as an instructor, that was Steve Baldwin. And some of us stayed on 2 Squadron, which is what I did. And basically, time on 2 Squadron after the OCU, for me, it was just, the whole Squadron's role was border patrol and dawn strikes or practice dawn strikes. And it was a lull. The Altena Farm attack happened in December.
Of 72.
72.
And this was before that. It was before Op Hurricane.
It was before Op Hurricane.
But Todd Yannicka was with you on the vampires?
He was my boss.
He was your boss.
He was a squadron leader there. And during this time, shortly after I went to 2 Squadron, that I was with him when we did instrument flying. And the pilot under instrument flying in the left-hand seat would wear a obstructed visor attached to his proper up and down visor, so that he couldn't supposedly see out the aircraft, he could only see the instruments. And the chap next to him was the safety pilot. So he would monitor everything. He took off on the instruments, and this, something went wrong, the right-hand man, the safety pilot, would take over. But during the course of this instrument flying, you did something called unusual attitudes, where you caged some of the instruments, and like the artificial horizon and the DI, and the safety pilot was instructed to fly the aeroplane around and give it back to the guy under the hood for him to sort out your unusual attitude. So I'd heard this very good trick that you throw the aeroplane all over the sky, pull a bit of G, put it in straight level and give it back to him so you have control. So I did this, gave it back and Todd just got under control, so stopped. He said, Greg, we're straight level. I've been flying this thing for thousands of hours. Give me an unusual attitude. So, okay, fine. So I threw it around a bit more, and then I pulled a loop, and I was pulling G, I was starting to tunnel out and grey out, and I said, well, Todd was, I think it was Todd, I hope I'm not doing him a disservice. Anyway, when he was blacked out, I said, you have control. It's amusing to see what happened after that as he recovered from his blackout and took over the aeroplane and got it back where it should be. I don't think he was too amused.
Interesting. Yeah. And then from Vampires, you went on to Provost?
Fourth Squadron, Provost and
Provost,
Trojans.
and this was now after Op Hurricane had started with the attack on Altina Farm in Centenary.
Yeah.
So
I'd actually done my reefer mill on Provost just before Altena, and I was operational again with Provost. And when Altena Farm happened, Simmer and Alf Wild were the first two guys that went up to Centenary, and then we sent up replacements or reinforcements halfway through January, and I was on one of those.
And so you were in support of ground troops who were doing follow-ups, trying to find the perpetrators.
Yeah, and then that's where the story I've just relayed about the mutes which came in.
And then Mukumbura?
Mukumbura, right. We used to position from Centenary, FAF 3 as we called it, to Mukumbura whenever the SAS was in Mozambique. And so you just fly up the day, wait all day as standby, fly back to Centenary at night and do the same again. So this one particular time I was on standby at Mukumbura, and the call came through the brown jobs that Bert Sachs and his men were in trouble across the river in Mozambique. So I was called in there, and they were being chased. I'm sure it was Fred's. Don't think it was Zandler. And they sort of marked Flot on the run as best you can, and I could see where the forward line of troops was. I put in a front gun attack, but as I pulled out the dive at the bottom of the attack, these guys, according to Bert, rolled on their backs and just fired up into the air. It's called the fly-through method. And I picked up a round. It came through I was by myself, I didn't have a passenger, and it came through the starboard floor and would have taken a passenger through the thigh. It hit the windscreen, right-hand windscreen, where it split. The inner core came across in front of my head and smashed the quarter light windscreen on my side, and the rear piece went backwards. The outer jacket went backwards and lodged in the canopy, and that would have probably hit the guy in the eye as well. So it was lucky we didn't have anybody there. But then it gave me problems for future attacks, because as I was, I don't know how you do this, but as I was positioning to come in, I couldn't see out the left-hand window. So I had to judge it and then turn in. And once I turned in, I was in a dive, it was fine because my windscreen was intact, no problem. Anyway, I put in 2 further attacks, and the guys, I'd obviously deterred the guys, the bad guys, and our guys managed to get out of there and got recovered later. I think I've got a picture of the bullet somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know if this will work.
Yeah, let's hold it up.
That's the inner core, and that's the outer core. And this has been sitting in my cufflink box for the last 45 years or something.
Rather there.
Rather there than in me. Yeah. But I know you interviewed Pete Simmons. He got shot in similar circumstances, but the bullet went in through the side of the aircraft, through his left leg, smashed that, and lodged in his right thigh. That bullet is still in his body. He was told it would work its way out to the surface, and then they'd be able to cut it and get it out. No, that's still in his.
That was also in Mukumbura, I think.
It was also out of Mukumbura.
Well, across the border.
Yeah.
Towards Cabora Bassa somewhere.
Yeah.
I think. Greg, April 74. That was a tough time for you.
Tough time for the blue jobs. First off, Keith Goddard and Rich Airy in a Canberra were on the 4th of April. They were doing a bombing run in Mozambique, and at that stage we used something called a 20-pound fragmentation bomb, and they would load 96 of them in a bomb box, all facing down, and you could drop different divisions at a time, or ripple the whole lot. Anyway, as they were running in on the target, one of the safety caps spun off one of the bombs and actually hit another bomb, causing a detonation. And then it was just a chain reaction up, all the bombs exploding up to the bomb bay, and then the whole lot just went bang, blew the wings off, and the nose just went straight forward. When they found the aircraft, Rich Airy was still holding on to the bomb release button. So that was a very sad day, and that was the last time the aircraft was using those bombs. Later, and I'll discuss that later, we came up with the Alpha bombs, the 300 round jobs. That was the first thing. The second one was on the 14th of April, 74. Chris Wyman and Pat Durrett took off from Centenary to go recce for tour camps north of the Zambezi. Well, they didn't come back. So obviously they'd force landed, or we didn't know what had happened. But over the next couple of days, we positioned aircraft to, I think it was Tet, and myself and Willie Wilson took Provost, and we went to Nova Magui, which is now underwater in Cabora Bassa. But we based up there, and with the Portuguese army looking after us, and some the brown jobs that we had up there, I can't remember who they were. I think they're SAS and RLI. And we were doing searches for Chris Wyman's aircraft. And as far as we were concerned, Willie and I, we flew about 400 or 500 yards apart and flew a grid pattern. And we covered the area. Decks were there with guys looking out the windows all along the sides of the decks. Allies, we even had hunters in there looking and trying to find Chris Wyman. On the
what aircraft were they flying?
They're Trojan, sorry.
Trojan. Okay,
Trojan.
yeah, sorry, carry on. Yeah.
On 19th of April, Al Bruce and Clive Ward came from. In fact, the other guys were a steamer, not Tet. They came from a steamer, and they'd been flying Trojans at that stage, and they said, "Well, listen, we've been stuck with this old Trojan. You know, the only aircraft in the world can take a bird strike on its trailing edge. Why don't we swap? You fly the Trojans and we'll take over the Provost," which is what happened. So the next day, Willie and I got airborne on the 20th in Trojans, and the Trojan had rocket pods under the wings, and therefore if you're flying level, you had to keep lifting the rocket pod out the way to check your holding position on the other guy, and he had to do the same with you. Anyway, we were doing this grid search again, and at this particular time, I had rising ground to my right, and Willie was on my left. So I was not silhouetted. They were behind me. We flew either side of a camp, and Willie was silhouetted, and he'd kept his height, so he's still level with me. So he's about 400 feet of ground instead of being on the trees like we usually do. Anyway, I just checked his position, and seconds later, something made me look again. I lifted the wing again, and he wasn't there. And I transmitted, Willie, you know. And so I pulled the power off the aircraft, dived down the side of this sort of mountain I was on, got to the bottom, pulled it up, pulled the wing over, got the pod out the way, and I saw this pinprick of light that just suddenly grew to a fireball the size of a double-storey house. And that was Willie hitting the ground. And then obviously I started flying circles around, and then with the fire, the first 6 rockets were used for marker rockets in each pod of these 37 millimeter snebs, and they had a 6-inch plug of white phos in there. And these rockets now, with the heat, were starting to shoot off, and it looked like that Space Shuttle Challenger when they had the accident on takeoff of those solid rocket boosters twizzling away, and that's the sort of thing that I was seeing. Anyway, I got, obviously the guys hadn't survived that. I got a call out. Boss Peter Boyer was in the area. I think he was flying a Kivet, it was a Cessna 185 at the time, and he'd been doing recce and search for Chris Weinman as well. And I got a call to him. Next thing, and I gave the grid reference, and next thing we had half the Air Force ready to assist. But somehow they seem to have gone to the wrong grid reference. I think it's about 10 Ks out. I saw them all flying in a big Balbo at the wrong place. So I called them over, and then PB was high, and he said, "Gosh, look at that camp, you know. It's a huge camp, huge." So Chris Dickinson joined up with me, and we put in strikes with the Trojans, and the Hunters put in strikes. At that stage I was running low on fuel, and I went back to Nova Magby and took over one of the provinces and went back. In the meantime, they put troops on the ground, and they were searching around, and they found all sorts of documents. The camp obviously was deserted after that. Whoever fired the rocket must run like hell. They were searching documents and things like that. Then one guy said, "Oh, he found a bone gun." A bone gun? You know, it was nowhere near the crash site. I said, "Look on the back, is there a name?" "Yes, Weinman." I said, "That's the guy we've been looking for." And I said, "Okay, well, look," because I was now like airborne controller to a degree, and I said, "Well, just widen your sweep. And they went further and further, and they found Chris's aircraft. And it had come down, the rocket had caused the engine to detach, and the aircraft had come down in a big tree, the only big tree in the area. And it got caught up by the wings and tail and was hanging nose down. And the bad boys had got the bodies out, buried them in the shallow graves, and then pushed branches up. But I think the aircraft had caught fire and burnt the tree in the first place. Now, I'd flown past that tree about 3 or 4 times, and it just looked like it'd been struck by lightning. It was so well concealed. And that's how we found Chris Weinman. And I think it was Darryl Watt was on the ground, and he's got a story about it from the SAS side. I think that was somewhere on Facebook. But it was, you know, a bit of a bad deal, as I said, a black April for the Air Force. Very remiss of me, I should have mentioned that Willie Wilson, Tech, was Flight Sergeant Roger Andrews, so we lost 2 guys there. So in April, we lost 6 guys. And
this was reported as a training accident?
The 2 Trojans that were shot down were reported as training accidents.
Yeah.
You can imagine how that burnt a hole in my, you can
see why. If they were in Mozambique, I don't think anybody was supposed to know
that we were operating there.
And I don't think the Portuguese wanted it to be
advertised,
widely known. So that's probably why that was done. Yeah. But Greg, then you went on to 7th Squadron, onto Alouettes.
Alouettes, yeah. But before that, we did a Paradak jump ourselves, and we did a couple of days training at the parachute training school at Surham, and there's all the cooks and bottle washers from the Air Force who thought they wanted to jump out of an aeroplane. But a lot of us were pilots, and it cost the government a lot of money to train. So instead of us jumping out and breaking legs on the earth, they threw us out over Lake Mac so we could drown. I remember when it came to the jump, Pete Simmons was the guy, he's the guy who stood in the door first. I was behind him, and they dropped 6 at a time. And it was, when you went out, it was such, we went out to 12,000 feet, so we were about 7,000 foot off static line, 7,000 feet of hanging in the chute. It was wonderful. It was such an exhilarating feeling. And the drill was you detach your reserve chute, lower it down, and then when you got near the water, you'd lift your legs parallel to the water and present a larger surface area, so you just splot and not go straight down like a diver with feet first. But I'd had 600 hours or 700 hours on Provis, and the actual parachute harness on a Provis was identical to the big parachutes that we were using to dive with one big exception. They had a circlip that went round the inside of the attachment. And the drill was, once you got in the water, you pulled the circlip out, twisted it, and you belted it, and you came out your parachute. Well, I twisted mine round, fine, and I was thumping hell out of it, and nothing was happening because the damn circlip was in there, so awful. But now the wind had picked up, and I was pulling my parachute out, so I was doing a bit of body surfing, trying not to drown. How'd you get out of this one? And I thought, and I let go, or I think you call it a K-pock or K-pole or something like that, attachment, and of course the parachute just dropped, and then they hauled me on board, and it was time to go and have beers. But it was just an aside. I later did, in Sydney Life, a tandem freefall jump, which was another story, but I think I was walking about 6 inches above the ground for 4 days after that, because that was such an adrenaline rush. It was great stuff. Joining 7th Squadron, we did about 80 hours on Alouette 2s, which were cheaper to run than the Alouette 3, and we did all our basic training on those, and then we finished off with about 50 hours on the actual Alouette 3, and trained all sorts of things like winching and cargo swinging, and of course using the weapons, the MAG on the chopper. One interesting thing about when we were doing that training, or later on when I was training, Henry Jarvie was a well-known tech in the Air Force, and he was actually training a new technician about hoisting, and the story was that after he trained the guy to use the winch and load him up and down to the helicopter, they swapped positions, and the trainee would now pick Henry up and down. Anyway, Henry had organised with me that when it was his time to be on the winch, I must go and hover over water, which is a trick we used to do sometimes, and dunk the bloke in the water. Anyway, that duly happened. Over the water, the trainee lets Henry down, soaking wet, up into the chopper, and Henry's just bursting out laughing like heck. And anyway, it transpired when we got back that Henry had the new trainee's blue uniform on under his overalls. So the trainee now had sodden blue uniform to go home with on the bus, and then we got his dry stuff out the locker. So silly things like that happened. But
then you started working with dogs.
Yeah, the first instance, the dogs didn't actually do a lot. We were operating Makuti, Komaki, Angwa Bridge area, and I can't remember the name of the unit we were with because it's so sad. I've tried to find out what happened. We went in there with dogs. Mike Liston and Rich Blimmerus were in the K car. I was with Ginge Morris on the G car. And it's probably about my third bush trip. We'd done some fire force actions, but nothing serious. But this one, we put in police with tracker dogs after this contact had happened, or reaction to the contact, and following up. And then I put in a stick near a re-entrant. It was going up a mountain, and these guys, they put 2 guys in the bottom of the re-entrant, and one at each side, and they were sweeping up towards a clump of bushes, when from that clump of bushes the terrorists were hiding there, and they came out and they just ribbed our guys. They dropped 3 of them dead straight away, and one survived. Well, that was a shock to the system, and we had a South African chopper with us. Guys got reinforcements, and there was nowhere to land, and they had to cut an LZ for the helicopter. And the South African guy went in there to try and pick up the wounded and the bodies, and it was too small, and whatever happened, he managed to have what's called a tip strike. And then he wandered off back to base with his aeroplane going waka, 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 waka. Not very well. And they cut it slightly larger, and I got in there and I got the 3 guys out. And we were flying off to an airfield about 15-20 minutes away. And, it's a bit gruesome, but you can cut this out if you want. But what I remember of that trip was, because the aeroplane, helicopter flies slightly nose down, all the blood ran forward and was pooling around my rudder pedals, and it formed, coagulated and formed a dark brown crust on the top, and it was rippling. It was like a skin on a rice pudding. And then when I came to land, of course, the attitude of the helicopter changes, and it ran back and it broke, and it was all crimson again. And to clean that helicopter was a bit of a mission. But when we got there, there was the squadron commander, George Alexander, and my very good mate, Bruce Collicott, who later got killed on Dax. They were the crew, and they came out with the body bags. And my tech and I, Ginge Morris, we got the bodies out, and I basically, with each body, I got his cap and went through the pockets, got diaries out, pens out, things. I cut off the bottom dog tag, and we wrapped them in some polythene or whatever, put the guys in the body bags, and off the deck went. I then had to take the kit back to the OC of the squadron, of this unit, which is very sad, and hand over the kit. The sad thing about that was one of the guys, his mother, worked with my mother in Elmer Sailing Centre in Lincoln Arcade, Baker Avenue, Salisbury. And every time we went to visit my mother, I saw this woman, and it just broke me up. I didn't know what to do.
Oh, so.
Yeah. Anyway, a bit emotional about that.
And then working with the sub-aqua unit,
Oh, yeah.
Greg,
That
you did some time with them.
Yeah, that was an interesting interlude. I think I was the Alloy 3 at Wanky, FAF 1, and there was an incident whereby a South African Air Force helicopter, I think it was Keith Coppin, I stand to be corrected on that, I think that's who the pilot was, and he had picked up 2 Kazakhs near the Binga area at night, and it was obviously a reasonable moon, and he was flying them back, I think he was flying them actually back to Binga, when he had a mechanical failure. In fact, the drive shaft between the gearbox and the rotors broke, and he had plenty of engine noise because it was still going, but the rotors were starting to wind down. So he auto-rotated at night, and he saw this nice flat area, and he thought, oh, I'll just land there, that's great, and he did that. Only thing is, it was Kariba weed, and the aircraft, settled, and then the blades cut a great big circle, anyway, and it sank. Anyway, the story is that the first 2 guys on the bank were the Kazakhs. Whether that was true or not, I don't know. But they were safe and nobody was hurt. But I went there the next day to start recovery and things like that, and taking a board of inquiry. Well, that came later, a bit later. But at one stage, 3 guys from the police sub-aqua unit, including Alan Brent, were flown up to Binga, and then I took them out to the incident site, and the army was there, and they had quite a powerful boat. And the trick was that they went down with 44-gallon drums, which were inverted, but they were full of water, but they were put down upside down and tied to the helicopter. And what they would do, first they took off the blades of the helicopter, and we showed them on our helicopter. Hugh McCormick was my tech, and we showed them how to remove the blades, and they got theirs off. Then they tied these 44-gallon drums there, and then they had a compressor on the boat, and they put compressed air into the bung of the 44-gallon drum, and of course forced the water out, made the thing buoyant. And they had 4 or 5 of these drums around, and that was sufficient to raise the chopper to the surface. So it was away from the lake bed, and but just the mast of the chopper was showing. And then they towed it with this motorboat very slowly around to a place where they think that they could actually land it, and there's a bit of a ramp there for them to pull it up. So they got that around, and I'd been off doing a relay change or something like that, but I was always attached to the scene, and as I said, I'd brought in the board of inquiry earlier. Anyway, when I got back, they had a bulldozer there, a small bulldozer, attached to the nose wheel by a rope, and they're trying to pull this Alouette out the lake. Well, it wasn't too long. If they'd continued much longer, they would have pulled the nose off it. Because for a start, the wheels had dug in because the brakes were still on. So I landed, obviously, and showed Alan and these guys how to release the brakes on a helicopter. But I realised it wasn't going to be enough, because it was well and truly dug in now into the mud. Mm. So I made my helicopter as light as possible. I had a cargo hoist on my helicopter, fortunately, and I made the aircraft as light as possible to the extent that actually pumped fuel out. And I brought it down to red light, which gives you 10 or 13 minutes of flying time. Made it very light. And I didn't Hugh wasn't in the aircraft, but he was marshalling me from the bank, and he had taught the guys, the sub-aqua guys, how to connect the hook and everything like that. And I went and hovered over the helicopter, lowered it down so they had slack in the chain. They hooked it up. I then took up pressure, tension, and obviously I wasn't going to lift a fully equipped helicopter full of water, but I was able to pull to maximum power, and the water just gushed out of it. Mm-hmm. And while that was happening, when it was down to, obviously we were having some success, the guy then pulled it out with the with the bulldozer, and of course I was obviously keeping it up, and out we went, detached and landed. Obviously put more fuel in, and and I was, as I say, I was in and out, and they then dismantled this helicopter, and that's when they found that this three-wheel drive unit was totally missing. Anyway, they had a special recovery vehicle there that had recesses in it to put tail booms and blades and, a proper recovery vehicle. And they got this helicopter onto the truck in bits and pieces. But then it was very late, and they didn't want to move at night. So they sat there, had a few beers, and the next morning they went out in convoy with the bulldozer leading. Well, all this activity over about 3 days had been well and truly watched from the other side of the river. And guess what was waiting for them? The bulldozer went over the landmine. No problem. Oh, straight over it, no problem. Because there's a flat plate and the pressure...
Smothered the blast.
No, it didn't set it off. Because it's a flat plate and it wasn't sufficient. This is my understanding of it. People might think I'm talking absolute rubbish, but I don't know. It went over the landmine and it didn't go off. This is the bottom line. So did other vehicles missed it. The one that hit it was the one with the helicopter on it. And it hit with the back wheels and it just twisted this truck and warped the already damaged helicopter even further because it was bolted in. So, long story short, they eventually got this helicopter back to Salisbury and it was taken out in a C-160, a transhaul back to South Africa. It flew again, and it flew for the South African Air Force. And a little bit of history. Later on, the SAF sold that helicopter to a company that was working in Mozambique.
Oh, I think another one.
Oh dear, I do have the number somewhere. But the bottom line was, my mate John Blythewood, also a helicopter pilot and hunter pilot, his son was a helicopter pilot, civvy helicopter pilot. He flew that same helicopter in Mozambique all those years later. So just end of story.
I think I know that chopper. Greg, the July 75 was a black day for the RLI. In fact, it involved Jan de Beer, who I worked very closely with during my time in 2 Commando, and then John Coe, who I also knew. So it was a very, very sad day, and an engagement that you were involved in.
There'd been a contact to the east of Fafor, Mount Darwin, and it was a TF, I think, I don't know which TF unit it was, but on the follow-up, these guys were in a dry riverbed, and a stick of 4, a warrant officer, 2, Bain, and a trooper Potgieter. And when they rounded a bend in the river, these gooks opened up on them, and they culled these 2 guys, and wounded the other guys in the stick, who obviously withdrew. They then called out the fire force, and we went in there with the fire force. It was Joey Deploy, in fact, was one of the officers involved. I think I actually put him in there later on during the day. But one of the guys was ex-American corporal
John Coe.
John Coe, yeah. And on arrival at the scene, he went over the side of the riverbank and went down to these guys to try and find out what was going on. And unfortunately, he got culled as well. These chaps, terrorists, were actually holed up it was like a turn in a riverbed, and during flooding it washed away the banks of the river, and there was an undercut, and the roots of a tree had overgrown, and there was a nice place for them to hide. I think it was only one terrorist, quite honestly. I think they had managed to sort the rest out, or the others had escaped, but this guy had a perfect hiding place, and so now we were 3 men down. The problem was, we didn't know if the guys were dead. They were too close to the terrorist hiding place. We didn't know where the terrorist hiding place was. And I wasn't K-Card driver, but I can imagine his predicament. You didn't want to put down heavy fire next to your own guys that close. Joe Deploy was trying to take a look over the side, and these guys opened up on him, and he got creased through the forehead. And that they withdrew. Now it's getting a bit late in the day, and they positioned ambushes around with reinforcements, and Bob Mackenzie went in with some SAS guy with their night vision goggles and night sights and things like that, and they were able to find the 3 guys. Obviously, they were deceased. And by this stage, they fired into this place, but the guy had gone. And during the night, this guy broke out. I think he'd actually taken the MAG from the riverbed, and he broke out and ran through one of the stops and opened fire. And Corporal De Beer, he got hit. I think he was hit in the leg by the femur, and he was by himself, and he had a radio, and we couldn't go in there because there was thick bush, and the moon had gone down, and we couldn't get any reinforcements to him. And we actually heard him dying over the radio, which is very, very sad. I will remember that for the rest of my life.